Okay, thank you. Hi, everyone. I'm Jennifir. I'm the teen librarian at Boyden Library in Foxborough, Massachusetts, home of the Patriots, in case you don't know that. And I'm here with Edward Underhill, wonderful author. He's here to talk about his YA books and now his adult book, his adult debut, which was an amazing book. And I really appreciate you coming in from California to talk to us.
Of
And I
course.
wanted to thank the Ashland Public Library for hosting this webinar and making this possible for uh, libraries across Massachusetts, New Hampshire, even one from California, joining us to make this possible for anyone who is interested in learning about Edward's books, which are I love them because you need a good romance in this day and age. So this is part of Foxborough's first annual Together with Pride program where the community, different organizations in the Foxborough community are doing events based in celebrating our Pride residents. And for me, I focus on teens mostly uh, and giving them a safe space and providing books and materials for them to explore and either read about themselves or learn about people, a different lifestyle that they're not used to, just so they can have empathy. So I'm gonna go ahead and get started on introducing Edward and telling you a little bit about a couple of his books. So Edward grew up in Wisconsin. He's lived in New York, currently is in California with his partner and his cat. What's your cat's name?
Daphne.
Yeah, okay. And also I found interesting and I really loved, and I listened to some of it. Edward is a composer of music for film,
Yes.
games, commercials, theater, and television. Um, so that also is was a nice added bonus I didn't know when I was like learning about you. Um, so I'll just show you a couple of his books. This is, I don't know if y'all can see this, the In Between Bookstore.
I have
And
mine
then,
too. Oh,
oh
you
yeah,
probably can't see it. There we
yeah.
go.
And in case you read this, both very cute and very relevant, I have to say. Um, So I am very grateful for you joining us. And so just a quick little description. He's also written Always the Almost, which was also a very cute book. And This Day Changes Everything. And in case you read this, are all his YA novels. And then also the adult debut was the In Between Bookstore, which is a fun read. And if you haven't read it yet, I suggest you read it. And So the In Between Bookstore, the adult debut, is about a young transgender man who finds himself back home and what meets himself in the past and in a bookstore that he used to work at. And wouldn't it be neat to all be able to meet each other, meet ourselves in our past? And so then I'm sorry, I'm new at this. If y'all And so, and then in case you read this, is actually another thing. I don't know, was his latest YA book. And I think we have all done this. We have met somebody, trains, ships going by each other, and you're like, oh, I want to remember this person, get to find this person, you can't find them. You're all over social media finding them. You're on the band website of like the band that they really both loved. And and you do this like with old classmates, also you're like, oh, how are they doing? You can't find them because they decided not to go on Facebook or they decided not to go on Instagram or they're not on Reddit and you just find. So I really love that. And I was able to relate to both of these books for that reason, because there's always that person you're like, oh, the one that got away, or that friend that you used to hang out with and they just kind of moved across the country and you don't know how they're doing. Um, so I want to try to now talk about some of your inspirations, Edward.
Yeah.
Um, my first question is, what inspired you to become an author? Have you always loved writing?
Yeah, I think like being an author is not something that I like sat down as a kid and was like, that's what I'm gonna do when I grow up. I was also always a musician growing up, and I think I sort of assumed like, oh, well, that's what I'll do. And like I started composing, and I was like, people told me I was good at that, so maybe I'll do that. And I could sort of see a path to do that, which like in some ways sounds a little bit like wild in my brain. Like, yes, I'm going to be a composer. That seems like a solid, career choice. Um, but it just like I kept writing. I started writing stories probably when I was like 8 or 10, and then decided to write my first novel at 14 because why not just do something big right off the bat? Um, and I just wrote for fun. I loved reading. I was that kid in the library checking out a stack of books every week. Um, and I just kind of read stuff that made me want to do something like that. So I think like I thought probably by my late teens, like, gosh, it would be really cool to, try to get a book published. But that's sort of about as far as I got. I didn't really think of being an author as like a real career path because I didn't see anyone else doing it. And I certainly didn't think that there would be room on the shelves for stories about people like me. So I think when I first started writing, I was writing straight characters. I was writing cis characters because it just didn't occur to me to do anything different. That's what I read. That's what I saw. And so I was like, okay, well, I guess that's what publishing does. Um, so that's what I wrote for a long time. And then it really wasn't until I started to see a few books on the shelves that had queer characters in them that I started to think, okay, maybe I should try again to get published, and maybe I should try this time writing an experience that feels true to my own experience.
I think that's wonderful. It's important that you realize that because if more queer authors didn't do that, then there wouldn't be any queer books, queer
Yep.
characters on the shelves.
Yep.
You know, so people can see themselves
Yeah.
in the characters. It's got to be really hard, and this goes with any kind of minority. It's really hard to read, just white cis characters. You want
Yeah.
to see
Yeah.
other character, people. And so what made you decide to become like a romance author?
It's funny. I really have written all over the genre map. Like I kind of love writing all different kinds of stories, and I would love to write all different kinds of stories eventually. Um, but I think at the time that I wrote All Is the Almost, which was my debut book, um, it was at a time where it was after 2016. I was feeling very scared and frustrated. And I felt like I want to write a story that just makes me happy. I want to write a story that sort of celebrates joy as kind of an act of resistance, if that makes sense, to just like
Yes.
remind myself that trans people are real and whole and complicated and deserve, um, kind of epic, wonderful love stories, just like cis people have gotten for so long. Um, so I think that was like a big part of it. And also just that I love writing really big feelings. And that's like a place where you find really big feelings a lot is in romances. Just that kind of like letting yourself very earnestly love another person. And I think especially for like the queer community, that kind of love, which is not just, I think, in my mind, like a big part of what I focus on in my books is not just romantic love between two people, but also the surrounding community. So a lot of my characters have very important friendships in their lives or very important other relationships because I feel like for queer people, especially, that kind of community and like who you choose to hold on to is extremely important. And that's what keeps me going. And I think that's kind of what keeps my characters going too.
That was one of the most, I guess, parts of the In Between bookstore that I really enjoyed was
Yeah.
how he went back home and realized that there were other people from the town who also were in the queer community, but because especially um, being in Oak Falls, a small Midwestern town, people didn't talk about it,
Yeah.
especially in high school,
Yeah.
and then you're also at the age where you're learning your own identity, your own, and not just your identity, but what you want to do with your life. So it's like a whole bunch of stuff. So I really appreciated how Darby went back home and was like, okay, there's more acceptance here than I thought. It's not that there wasn't non-acceptance, but
Right.
maybe the town has grown some in itself too. And I really enjoyed that.
Yeah, I
Um,
think that was always really important to me because I think the mid I write about the Midwest a lot because that's where I'm from. I'm originally from Wisconsin. Um, and the town of Oak Falls that's in the In Between Bookstore is in Illinois. It's actually completely fictional. It doesn't exist, but it's based a lot on places that I grew up or that I had family that lived. Um, and I was thinking a lot about the differences between 2009, which is when Darby, the main character of the book, kind of time travels back to. So he goes back to this bookstore that he worked at as a teenager, and when he walks through the door, he kind of goes through a time slip and encounters his teenage self behind the register. So it's basically like the book version of if you could tell your younger self anything, what would it be, right? Um,
mhm.
and like what I wanted to do with that book was also like be able to think about how our understandings of queer identity have changed, what gets talked about, how much more um, things are just out there in a way that they weren't even back in 2009. So a lot
Right.
of this was also kind of based on some of my own experiences of growing up in a place where nobody talked about this stuff. Um, maybe you were vaguely aware of like that one kid that might be gay, but like nobody talked about it. And there was absolutely like nothing about transgender identities. It just wasn't even something anybody knew about where I was from. Um, and so like I kind of wanted to try to capture some of the nuance of um, how these small towns actually are. Like I think a lot of I've seen plenty of like op-ed pieces in the New York Times or something that are like the Midwest where everyone votes a certain way and looks a certain way and it's all like one block, right? And actually there is a lot of nuance there and there are queer people there. And so I kind of wanted to like have this small town be reflecting that. So you see that there are queer people there and also that it is still different and complicated to be a trans person in the midst of that. It's not always like yeah, it's not always as simple or straightforward, and that there are some people who still need to leave, and there are some people who are okay staying. Um, yeah.
Yeah, thank you for that because what you were trying to convey did come across. Um, so who are some authors that have inspired you?
Oh gosh, a whole bunch. I mean, it's funny because like I think a lot of the authors that I feel like inspired me wouldn't necessarily be in the genres that I'm writing now. So one of the probably the first author that I remember reading and who made me think like I want to be a writer was Diana Wynne Jones. I read Howl's Moving Castle, checked it out from the public library, and I think that book probably lived at my house for like a year because I would just return it when it was due, and then go back the next day and like check it out again. But that was the first book where I remember reading it and just thinking, this is so cool. How did she do this? Like, I want to figure out like how to write a story that's this good. Um, so that I've definitely, I think other authors, Patrick Ness is another one. He's so good at writing books where the language is very simple, but it hits very hard, which is something I think about like on a craft level a lot. And then, gosh, I mean, there's been so much stuff that I've read recently that's good. I just feel like there are so many authors that are writing now. Yeah, but I think those two are like two that stand out as like I remember reading them and having that like really influence my writing and really push me to be like I want to write more and I want to write better.
Thank you for that. Um, so now I want to ask and talk about In Case You Read This,
Yeah,
which was so would you give us like just a quick little synopsis of In
sure.
Case You Read This?
Yeah, so In Case You Read This is my YA book that just came out a couple weeks ago. And it is about two trans boys who are moving across the country in opposite directions. And they happen to run into each other in a motel in Nebraska because both their families are staying there for a night. And they sort of spend this like magical evening together where they just kind of hit it off and they have an amazing connection and they have a great time. Uh, and then it's so perfect that they decide they don't want to ruin it or risk ruining it by telling each other, their last names or trading phone numbers or any kind of contact information. And then, of course, the next day they immediately regret it, but they can't find each other. So the rest of the book is kind of about them settling into the new places that they live and then trying to find their way back to each other, sort of with the help of a large community of chaotic queer friends.
Which I absolutely love. They were great. Some of the personalities that the bird lover loved.
Oh, Brian, yes. Yeah.
Yes.
This
I
is
was like,
probably the
that was a
largest
nice
cast.
quirky.
Yeah, it's probably the largest cast I've ever written. I basically had to have a piece of paper next to my desk at one point. It was so embarrassing, like all the characters' names until I got to know them because I couldn't remember them at first.
Do you keep like a when you have their names, do you keep like character traits and like personality traits so you don't mix that up too?
A little bit, yeah. It's like once I kind of like could keep all their names straight, then the personalities start sticking in my head, um, a little bit. But yeah, it was a lot to wrangle until, it's like I mean, you're like walking into a room with like 10 people in it and being like, I'm trying to get to know everyone in this room all at the same time. It was a little bit how it felt.
Like hosting a party
Yeah.
and giving everyone equal time. Um, so one thing I found interesting was like they moved not to only state, and one's moving to California and one is moving to the Midwest.
Yes.
And how the one that moved to the Midwest seemed to have an easier time to fitting in and find a queer community, whereas the other one moving to California seemed to have a little bit of a harder time. And I found that interesting, even though there was more acceptance and more people that he could meet there, it was still, it just goes to show that sometimes it's not the place and who's accepting. And did you do that on purpose to kind of give like a
I
different perspective?
I did, yeah, because I think like it's very easy for talk about like places and what's accepting and who's accepting to get kind of flattened into like, oh, well, if you just move here, everything will be fine. And if you move here, everything will be terrible. And I think the answer is often like so much more complicated because you just is a little bit of like luck of the draw of who's there in each place. But also with In Case You Read This, I really wanted it to be a story not just about trans teens, but about two particular trans teens. And Gabe, the one who moves to California, is very he moves kind of hoping that when he gets there, he's going to magically become someone else. He's going to like become someone who's more like the queer people that he's seen online, who are like out and loud and proud and sort of performing their identity in a certain way. And when he gets there, he discovers, surprise, surprise, he's actually still stuck being the same person. Um, and I think like a lot of us have done that of like kind of hoping that if we just put on different clothes or we like go somewhere else, like we'll become someone new. And so that's kind of what he's hoping, and it doesn't happen. And then so some of the book is like about him realizing that he doesn't have to do queer identity a specific way. There isn't one right way to do it. He can be his like quiet self and have his small group of friends, and that's just fine. And then Arden, who's moving to Michigan, has this whole expectation that, like, well, he's going to move to Michigan after having this great group of queer friends in LA, and everything is going to suck, and no one's going to know what to do with him. And that doesn't end up being true either. So I kind of like I set them up basically each to have a certain belief of what's or an idea of what's going to happen, and then I tried to undermine it as much as possible to show that things are a lot more complicated, but also so they could grow as characters and they could develop more important friendships for each of them to have.
I think it was a great message to send in doing that because you're right. We tend to do that as people think that it's sometimes you can get lost in the sea of people lose yourself in at the
Yeah.
same point.
Yeah.
Um, how did you come up with Damaged Pixie Dream Boy for the name of the band? I love the name.
Yeah, so this is the band, and in case you read this, it's a completely fictional band, but it's one of the ways that Gabe and Arden, the two main characters, kind of bond very early on as they realize they're both huge fans of this band. Um, so this band actually first appeared in This Day Changes Everything, which is another of my books. It's like a little Easter egg that it's sort of a very small piece of that book. Um, and I never really thought of it as like, oh yes, I'm going to pluck this out and have it be a major player in the next book. But I was just kind of coming up with like what sounds like it would be a wild, fun punk name for like a queer band. And that's what I came up with. It was sort of, I think, playing on Manic Pixie Dream Girl as a concept originally. Um, and then when I decided I like, gosh, I need something for them to bond over in this book. I was like, oh, it would be really fun to like bring in this band. Um, because I was also really interested in this book in like uh, bringing in a lot of like online spaces and text communication and all the ways that teens kind of connect now that isn't just face to face.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of online fandom in this book. There's a lot of there's like a very defunct forum for the band that like gets used at one point. Um, so like having it be something that would kind of be able to be the crux of the entire book that they can start by connecting about the band, they can end by connecting about the band, and then that's sort of the through line in the middle. And then I just got to have fun like coming up with this band that sort of got to be the kind of band that I think I would have had a lot of fun discovering if it had actually existed when I was a teenager.
Yeah, I think so too. I agree with that. Listen, I have to ask, have you been to Carhenge?
I have not. Yeah, Carhenge is like at the very beginning of this book, and it does really exist. It's a place in Nebraska that for some reason just has a bunch of cars like stuck standing up like to look like Stonehenge. And I was just like, I was trying to figure out where to start this book, and it was for some reason really hard. And my agent was like, what if they just like found like some, could you like start at some random roadside attraction or like something to like set up the road trip vibe? And I was like, oh, that sounds fun. So then I promptly Googled like the weirdest roadside attractions. Like I think I just Googled that. And the number one thing on the list was Carhenge. And I was like, great, that's what we're doing. And it was fun. I found pictures and like they have a whole website and yeah.
Yeah, I've seen that because like it would be a fun road trip to make. Go on all these weird attractions because don't
Yeah.
they have like giant cows and pickles and things, different things like that. I thought that was funny because it would be a fun thing to see, and he wasn't too happy about being there, but at
Yeah,
first.
it's just such a specific road trip vibe, right? Like I wanted to get some of that fun, weird road trip vibe in there.
Another thing I really enjoyed about this book was the dynamics between Gabe and his family, and I'm sorry, the name of the other character just went out of my
Oh,
head.
Arden?
Arden and his family,
Yeah.
and just the different dynamics in the families, and how close one was with his sister until they got to California.
Yeah.
So I like how you threw that in there, like sibling friendship, the friendship rivalry and the friendships that they have with other friends. And so how do you decide like on family dynamics? Does it just kind of flow of its own?
It was like with this book, I didn't even think about that going in, and it sort of happened out of necessity because I realized once I had this misconnection concept, and the idea was that they would be trying to find each other again. It's like, okay, well then the big climax at the end of the book is them finding each other again. It's them being back together. So what am I going to do in the middle of the book? Like all of a sudden I had this romance, right, where the two main characters were going to be very far away from each other for a lot of the book. Um, and so as I was thinking about like, okay, well, I mean, quite literally, how am I going to fill time in this book? I started thinking about like, okay, well, what else is going to come up in their lives? What other challenges are they going to face that naturally happen when you move to a new place where you don't know anybody? when, like what's happened that has caused them to move. So Arden, for example, his mom loses her job. She's having a bit of a crisis, so they move to Michigan to live with his grandmother. That then immediately sets up like family tension because like what, she's having his mom is having a hard time, the grandma's having a hard time. That sort of unearths all these like difficult family dynamics that he's caught in the middle of. And then for Gabe, sort of in terms of like him wanting to move to California and like invent himself as a new person, some of that is that he wants to separate from his sister that he's been very close to, and they kind of had all the same friends. And that causes tension. Like, is that what she wants? And, she's going off to college next year and he feels like he's going to be left behind. And those are all things that like I don't, I love writing romance, but those are also like real things that teenagers deal with and that like I remember being very hard when you're that age and you have siblings who are changing or leaving you, or you have, you're aware of like your parents as people suddenly who are like having lives of their own that are complicated and that's impacting you. Um, so I wanted a lot of that in there that I think like there are sort of overall themes for each character can kind of be tied. Arden has this anxiety about being perfect, for example, and that can kind of tie into everything about how he interacts with his family and how he interacts with Gabe. Um, so that like, you can kind of turn that whole big mess into like one storyline that follows through and gives your characters then multiple levels to to grow, multiple ways to grow and change.
Yeah, I really enjoyed that aspect because it gave them the characters more depth and gave us a chance to get to know them as people, not just as potential romantic interests.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm going to move on to In Between Bookstore, which I absolutely loved your adult debut. I thought it was cute. I love the concept of going back in time, and just like the reference to the books that were in 2009 versus like now, and and it was, and even the cell phone dying
Yes.
every time. I love that little aspect of it. So can you give us just a quick little synopsis of In Between
Yeah.
Bookstore?
So the In Between Bookstore, I will say, despite having a lot of romance in it, is not what I would call a romance book. It does not have a traditional sort of happily ever after for a main couple. But the In Between Bookstore is about Darby, who's about to turn 30. He's trans. He's living in New York City, and he's kind of having a hard time. Um, he's just lost his job, and his rent is going through the roof. So he's sort of in this quarter life crisis. And he finds out that his mom, who still lives in this small hometown in Illinois where he grew up, is downsizing. So he decides to move home and help her downsize. And when he gets home, he stops by the bookstore that he used to work at as a teenager. And when he walks in, he enters the time slip and encounters his teenage self behind the register. Um, so it's sort of about him getting to, in a sense, like go back and sort of try to re-navigate some of what set him on the path that he's on as a teenager, and also try to figure out what went wrong between him and his best friend Michael when they were teenagers. They sort of had this big falling out, and then Michael is still in this town teaching at the high school, and so there's a lot of I would say like sort of second chance romance there, except the couple doesn't end up together. So it's a lot of self-discovery and coming of age with sort of a magical realism moment.
This one was I enjoyed this one also because it gave an adult perspective, as in further in the transition of life and transition and identity.
Yeah.
And so what I really appreciated and enjoyed reading about was Darby's talking about the first time he came out and how he met his group of friends and the experience, and how it was difficult even in the queer community for him to come out to someone, to them. And
Yeah.
I found that very eye-opening as someone who is not a part of the queer community, but an ally of the queer community. It gave me a lot of insight. And did you kind of, what was your thought process in writing how he came out?
Yeah. So there's a scene in the book that is sort of a flashback to Darby when he first gets to college and he leaves Oak Falls. He goes to college in New York City. That's his kind of I am escaping this small hometown. And he goes to a LGBTQ sort of meetup in for college students in New York City or in at NYU where he's going to college. And he finds it totally overwhelming when he walks in and he's like barely come out to himself as trans. Um, and it's a little overwhelming to like, so he's in this mixer and the first thing they say is like turn to the person next to you and like, say something. And the person that he ends up talking to who becomes one of his friends, they kind of have this moment of coming out to each other. And that moment was important to me to write because sort of on several levels. One, that I think, coming out stories are very important in the queer community, but they're also stories that are very complicated and different and are often kind of condensed down into one experience. This is how coming out looks. Um, and in this particular case, I was trying to wrestle with the fact that Darby is walking into suddenly a situation in a big city where it's probably been easier and less of a big deal for people to come out for a while. Um, but that's not what he's familiar with. He's familiar with a place where this isn't talked about and where it's not easy to come out. So he's kind of coming in with all of that baggage. But then also that, again, I remember being in spaces in the early 2010s where it wasn't that big a deal to walk in and say, I'm gay, but where people just still didn't totally know what to do with you if you said you were trans. There just wasn't as much understanding of what that meant, especially I think for trans men. Um, Trans women have sort of been a little bit more visible for longer in some ways within the queer community. Um, so I remember having like some weird hesitation about like, um, how are people reading me? Like I definitely sometimes just got read as a cis gay man, like there's complicated, nuanced levels of identity. So I kind of wanted to try to capture all of that in that moment to recognize that it was important for this character to come out, that it was like important for him to be able to say who he was. Um, but that it was also complicated, especially when you're still sort of figuring it out for yourself.
Yeah, and that was a very I thought that was a wonderful way to do it. And also it made me think about how yes, this isn't really the only coming out moment. There's different situations, different moments, different people, family members.
Yeah.
Um
Never ever really won too. I think there's often treated as like, well, there you've come out, you're done. It's like, no, it's constant, it's changing, it's a process that never ends.
and it's a good scene though for an ally to read. Gives an ally a little bit of an understanding of how complicated it is.
Yeah.
Um, because that's just a small portion of an identity. There's, all the other things that make you who you are. And so I think that was a very pivotal, important moment in the book. Um, and so how did, just really quickly, because I know we have to move on to the next thing, just how did you come up with the idea to do the travel in time, the
Yeah, that was always kind of a central conceit because
Mhm.
I was thinking about this very much literally as like if you could tell your younger self anything, what would it be? I remember sort of uh seeing this question pop up, I'd see it pop up on social media or something, and a bunch of people would respond. And of course, you'd have people saying like, "Oh, well, I'd tell my younger self the winning lottery numbers." Um, but I remember being really struck by how many queer people I saw saying like, "I would tell my younger self, we're gay, we're trans, we're going to be okay." And that was again one of those experiences where I felt like, oh gosh, I thought that was just me. Like I've thought about that. I've thought about like, as someone who existed in a time and in a small town where I had no concept of that identity. I had no idea why I felt as terrible as I did. Um, to just be able to go back and say like, hey, there is a word for how you're feeling. It's this, and you can do something about it. Um, that I think like that's sort of a powerful question to ask. But then a lot of the book became like, well, what does that change? Will that actually change the things you think you want it to change? Does it like fix everything? Um, so so sort of the time travel element then was always necessary because you were always going to have like, well, if I could tell my younger self anything, what would it be? Well, therefore, then I have to have the moment to talk to the younger self, right? And I think then the bookstore just became a kind of perfect portal because I always feel like when I walk into bookstores or libraries for that matter, they exist a little bit out of time and space. They're sort of magical places where you're
Mhm.
looking around at all these books and they're literally, any kind of possibility, any kind of story that you could get lost in. And I kind of wanted that representation there for Darby to walk in and like think about all these different ways that his story could go.
One thing, I was in San Diego last year, and you were on a panel, and one of the something you said on the panel, I think would resonate great for any teen, especially learning their identity and discovering themselves, is that there's no wrong way to be queer. And that was
Yeah.
something a few of the panelists said, and I thought that's such an important thing for them to know.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I always write books with that in mind, that I think there can be so much pressure within the queer community, not just on teens, but on adults too, to like be queer the right way, to perform it the right way for either other queer people or for straight people, as though like if we just do it the right way, the bigots won't hate us anymore, which is frankly never going to happen. Um, and so like there isn't, because like there are different ways to be queer as many different ways as there are people. And all of that is complicated and nuanced and beautiful. And that to me is like the fun of writing stories, is getting to try to capture all the different ways that that looks for all sorts of different people.
And you do that in your books with the different characters because they have different perspectives or different identities or different ways they approach their identities. And I think that's a great way, one of the great things that you do in your writing. Um, so I just want to know if you, what projects that you can talk about that you have upcoming.
Yes, I can talk about one. I think it hasn't been formally announced yet, but I think it will be formally announced very soon. Although I also said that like 3 months ago, and then nothing happened. So we'll see. Publishing takes forever sometimes. But I am writing a second book for adults, which is tentatively called The House of Now and Then, and it will be coming out hopefully in the summer of 2026. And it's about a trans man who's going through sort of a big breakup, and he rents a beach cottage on the beach of Cape Cod for a
Okay.
summer. And when he walks into the cottage, he discovers that behind each door in each room is someone from his past. So my agent very jokingly nicknamed it the therapy house because it is like, he has a lot of stuff to work through in the house. But it is very much a summer beach book, but with a little bit of magic and a little bit of romance.
Okay, I can't wait. That sounds like as intriguing as the In Between Bookstore concept,
I
to be
hope
honest
so.
with you. Um, so I know there are people who have questions. So I want to open up the Q&A. Mina, do you mind sharing with us questions?
Not at all. Do you want me to come back on screen?
Yes, please.
Okay. Great. Hello. That was amazing. So fascinating, your thought process. I was absolutely mesmerized. Okay. So Lisa asks, what are some of your favorite LGBTQ books other than of your own, of course?
Oh no, you expect me to pick just a few? This list could go on forever. Okay, a few I will shout out very quickly. If you are looking for adult books, especially in romance, Don't Want You Like a Best Friend by Emma R. Albin. It is basically lesbian Bridgerton Parent Trap. It is
I
very
love
sweet, and there is a whole lot of pining. Um, if you want YA, I will shout out Love at Second Sight by F.T. Lukens, which is paranormal uh, romance. It also has slightly younger teen protagonists, which is great. I think they're about 15. I will also shout out The Summer of Bitter and Sweet by Jen Ferguson, which has really, really wonderful ace representation. And then, gosh, I have to think of some more books. Okay, and then for something completely different, I will shout out How to Survive a Slasher by Justine Picella Winans, which is a very campy queer horror. It's fantastic.
It's
Very
been
funny. So not too horrifying, mostly funny.
fabulous. So, for those people who weren't writing fast enough, you can watch the video later and catch all the titles. Those are books, some of them which my romance book club has read and recommended as well. So I'm totally with you, Edward. Um,
Good.
okay, Julia asks a bunch of questions. Hi, in the book, this day changed everything. How did the main character feel before and after that day?
Ooh. Um, I mean, I think one thing that was really important to me in writing that book was that I wanted to make it clear that the characters were going to be okay, even though they were kind of parting ways at the end. Spoiler alert. Um, so they both grow a lot in their confidence, sort of not just with each other, but fully with themselves. So I kind of think for both of them, like, I just imagine them going home and taking up more space,
Hmm.
like just being able to like be more fully themselves and more comfortable and um yeah, I think kind of more comfortable with the space they take up.
Awesome. So that day changed them significantly.
Yes.
Oh, fabulous. Danson asks, you have written an adult book and YA books. Which of the two genres or formats or do you find easier to write?
Ooh. Um, I think at this point I would say YA just because I've done more of it. And so I'm sort of familiar with the format. Like I don't want to make it sound like it's just like, you know, beats and I'm just like checking, check marks off a list. Um, but I think that it feels very familiar to me. The voice feels very familiar. The kind of expectations that of like what teen readers are going to need feels very familiar. And I think I'm still feeling out what you can do in adult and just what are the subtle differences between writing the two age categories. Yeah.
Um, to add to add to that question, are there different levels of what you're allowed to do in adult? Like there's you might have more freedom in adult writing versus like in YA writing.
Certainly in some ways. I mean, if you're writing romance, you can get a lot sexier with it for sure. Um, but I think like to my mind, it's more about what kinds of self-discoveries you're exploring, what kinds of stages of life you're exploring. Like I'm very interested in writing about transitions, for lack of a better word, sort of whether their identity, whether they're just in your life, whether they're in your relationships, whatever that is. And it's just kind of like you're in subtly different kinds of those, whether you're a teen or you're an adult. Um, so yeah, I think it's just kind of about figuring out like what are the slightly different what are the subtle differences between sort of where you're at in your life as an adult, what you've processed, what you've been through versus when you're a teenager where you feel like you've been through a lot, but the world is actually very, very big and very new.
So, as a follow-up to Jennifer's question, which follow up to Danson's question, is why do you think adults read so much YA?
Ooh, I love this question. So this is also why I started writing adult, because I am one of those adults who still reads YA, and so are most of my friends. Um, I think it's a few different reasons, but I know for me, a big part of it was that that was where the queer representation was. Um, in the kinds of books that I wanted to read, mainly that weren't drama books, that weren't books about like how hard it is to be queer, which, as important as those books are, were not what I always wanted to read. I wanted to read fun, snappy books. I wanted to read genre fiction. I wanted to read plot-driven books. And a lot of that is just in YA. It just felt like a lot of adult books didn't necessarily speak to my experiences in identity, and then also a little bit generally generationally too. I think millennials and younger are having a different experience of what being an adult means. And I think we're starting to now see adult books that speak to that a little bit more, but there was definitely a lag there. And so I was definitely reading YA for a long time.
Yeah, I personally find it less stressful sometimes.
Yeah,
It talks
that
about
too.
the same issues, but in a way that is much more digestible to me.
Yeah.
Um, so if you had an opportunity to write a sequel for any of your books, what would that look like?
Oh, um, what a good question.
Very good.
I think I've thought about it the most with Always the Almost, because there's a very clear he sort of wins a piano competition at the end, but then there's a bigger one coming. And so there's a very easy, like, I could write the bigger piano competition, which would kind of be fun, like opening up to more characters and sort of more drama. And that would happen in New York City. So, you'd sort of be opening up the world a little bit like that too. So that's probably the one that I can most easily picture doing.
Mhm. You talked earlier about what has inspired you to write. What do you hope to inspire in your readers?
This is always a funny question to me because I always feel a little bit like once I'm done with the book and it goes out into the world, it stops belonging to me
Mhm.
and it belongs to the reader. And therefore, whatever you find in it is the right thing for you to find. And it doesn't really matter what my intention was. What matters is like what you find.
Mhm.
But I think I hope that readers will feel seen, will read with empathy, and will be able to just enjoy a good story. I always write books where being trans and queer matters. Like I certainly can't envision any of these characters not being that way. It's absolutely who they are. But I know for myself as a reader, I want to just read fun stories where my identity is in there, not as a niche
Yes.
identity, but simply as who these characters happen to be while also having this story happen to them. Um, and so I think that's what I write, and that's what I sort of hope that readers are able to enjoy in the
Mhm.
books that I write.
I think that happened a lot, when we were getting a lot of books by Black authors, and there was this whole conversation about how do you write Black joy? You're not just writing Black issues, and I think that that's a really important conversation for everybody to have to make sure that we're showing the whole picture or reading the whole picture because I'm not a writer.
Yeah, I mean, it brings up the conversation of why is a certain identity the default, and everything
Mhm.
else
Yeah.
has an issue book around it.
Hmm.
And to me, I would just like, well, why can't my identity be the default for this particular book? Like, I think we need all sorts of those books. I want to just read a good story and um, not feel like the marginalized identity is contained within it, have to be there to teach a certain kind of person something.
Mhm. Yeah, and there's a lot of intersectionality in it. There's different levels and different we all identify in different aspects of life, whether it's racially, sexually, genderly, or just we're not just
Yeah.
one certain identity. And I think that's important to be able to convey. And that's why I like your stories and YA particularly, they do seem to be more plot driven instead of identity driven. You know, it's just the character just happens to be transgender. The
I
character
get
just
bored
happens to be a
otherwise.
woman.
I like reading plotty books, so if I was writing
Yeah.
issue-driven books, I would get bored.
I love that, plotty books. I'm going to write that
Yes, I do too. That's like perfect.
Um, okay, I'm going to save my question for last because we do have a couple more. Danson also asked, what are the pleasures and pressures of your life as a writer?
Deadlines. Deadlines are. I was just telling Jennifir before we got on this call, like I turned in a book this morning, so I have, yeah, the deadlines are real. But no, I think a very real pressure right now is trying to create in the moment in the country that we live in.
Mhm.
You know, when I was writing in case you read this, I was literally looking at Midwestern states and thinking like, okay, well, where can I have Arden move? I really wanted to have him move to the Midwest. Where can I have him move where I don't feel like I am going to be writing a harmful experience of being trans?
Mhm.
And it's been really hard to watch the number of states dwindle where I feel like I can do that, to feel like I am walking a very fine line between, because I really want my teens to exist in the real world. I don't want to write a reality where we pretend that transphobia doesn't exist, but I also don't want to write trauma for them. So that has been a really hard line that's only gotten harder to walk, I think.
Yeah.
But in terms of the pleasures, I think like the moments when I realized that something I did really worked. And by that, I mean, I was in Texas at a teen book festival last year, and a trans boy came running up to me right before my signing line closed. And he was like, he was holding my first book, the first book that I wrote. And he's like, I picked this up because the cover was good. And then it was trans, and then it was gay, and I am too. And it was like a reminder that, you know, I'm not the kind of author that gets fan mail all the time. I'm not the kind of author that's out there hitting big bestseller lists. But there are still people for whom finding a book like that is a really big deal. Um, and he gave me a bracelet that he'd made, and I still like wear it to a lot of book events because it's like a reminder to me that I am doing this for other people. And that's really meaningful.
Mhm. Well, I'm just going to sort of comment that maybe those kids in the Midwest probably need you even more than the kids that are not in the Midwest.
Yes, they do. Yes. I mean,
So Abby says, I'm a library worker who focuses on teen services and love to recommend your titles. Do you have any thoughts on how we can support the LGBTQ plus community, especially youth, in public third places like libraries?
Ooh, good question. I mean, when I've been on panels at like ALA and I get this question, I feel like the first thing that I usually say is talk to other librarians and ask them what is working, because you guys are like so smart and so thoughtful, and you always have so many ideas that I would never come up with. Um, but I think one thing that I will say, just coming at it from like a point of view as a trans person, is that I have seen many librarians who understand that pronouns are important. But I think one thing that you can do that can really be helpful going one step farther is to not set up an expectation, actually, that everyone has to say their pronouns. So if you have a teen book club, or if you are meeting teenagers, you can say, I am whatever your name is, and these are my pronouns. Would you like to tell me yours? Or just not say anything at all and see if they say them back? Because for some teens, they're still figuring them out. They may not feel comfortable saying them around other people. Because I remember a moment where like pronouns, people suddenly became aware of pronouns, and all of a sudden I was getting like, what are your pronouns? And I was like, why am I the only person that you're asking that to? You know, so it's like being thoughtful about that. And then also just like, you have good instincts as a teen librarian. There are great resources out there. LGBTQ Reads is a great resource if you need more queer books. But also just like trusting your instincts to like look at a kid and know what books they're going to need. And that if you sense that there is a queer or a trans kid that needs some queer or trans books, think about mixing them up with the books that all of their friends are already reading. So give them the big popular books, give them the fun books, and then say, hey, if you like this, you might also like the romance element in this one or the fantasy element in this one that happens to be queer. And let them come to it that way so that they don't feel like it's something they have to read because of X, Y, and Z reasons.
I will add,
like stubborn as a teen, and if someone had said like you need to read this because you're gay or whatever, I would have been like, fuck you.
yeah. But I will add to that. I was telling Edward earlier how I have a teen who is in the process of learning their identity, and I had the book Flamer. They saw it, got extremely excited, went and signed up for a library card just so they could check it out. So that's, as a teen librarian, that's why I'm here, to provide books that get them excited, and when they see themselves or what they think they may be leaning toward, and help in their discovery process.
Yeah.
Edward, can you stay for like an extra couple of minutes just so we can get to all the questions? Marina asks, have you experienced any book challenges or bans in regard to your YA novels?
Probably. I don't actually know. It's kind of one of those things where sometimes other authors will let you know if they see you pop up on a list. Sometimes your publisher will. My publisher hasn't let me know, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's not happening. I know one of my publishers at least just tends not to tell their authors. So I wouldn't be surprised. I also think based on when my books have started coming out, because they've been so recent, what I'm almost more worried about is the sort of soft ban issue of just parents just not buying them, or that they're just not in schools because it feels too risky. I think like there's definitely been some I think the cover design of In Case You Read This, for example, was I actually didn't talk to my publisher about whether they did this on purpose, but in my mind, some of the cover design was there to communicate. Like, to me, it reads like a book where you're like, okay, this might be a romance, but it's not necessarily screaming that, so that it kind of hides a little better. I don't know if that's a good or a bad thing. Yeah, so I don't know about personally. But I will say, for example, like I haven't counted on, it was so wonderful to be invited to this because I haven't counted on getting invited to school events, getting invited to library events, because I know for most of my queer author friends, the number of things they've gotten invited to has tanked.
That's good to know. So we know that we should reach out to them.
Absolutely. And I was gonna just add to the question about the third spaces is that I wonder if libraries need to think about programming with intention and mission versus fear, because obviously there's places that it is very fearful to do certain things, but that if we just look at what we're trying to do in the communities we're trying to engage, that we should continue to do it as long as it feels safe to everybody, or as long as we can make it safe for everybody. And that's a really tough one right now.
Yeah, the thing that I've certainly said as an author is that I fully intend to, keep writing trans books. As long as my publisher will let me. If someone takes that trans book off a shelf, cool. I will write another one. You can put it in its place. Make them take that one off. I will put another one there. That's kind of how I think of it, and sort of how I hope librarians are able to think about it too. They made you take that book off. Cool. There are so many trans books now, or queer books, really. There aren't that many trans books. There are so many queer books now. There are so many BIPOC books now. Find a new one, put it there. Make them make you take that one off and just keep doing it.
Right. When something's missing off the shelf, we buy a new one. So like, who are they hurting, right? Okay, so last possibly last question. Danson asks, what is your take on writing in the era of AI?
Ah, um, I think that, I mean, okay, I will say I don't go for AI. I am very, very staunchly anti-AI. It's an environmental disaster, and I also, it's whatever, how, if you use it to write because of the way it was built, you are by default stealing from other authors because that's how it's built, right?
Mhm.
Um, so I'm certainly worried about it. Um, but maybe I'm just like a chronic optimist. I don't know. I believe, as someone who writes big feelings, I still believe that there is something that AI is never going to be able to get in terms of writing really big
Yes.
feeling human experience. And my hope is that we as humans will still want to seek out those actual human experiences in
Mm.
words. But I think like, we're certainly seeing in terms of on the publishing side, a lot of authors fighting battles with their publishers to try to get anti-AI language into our contracts. And it's difficult right now. Yeah.
Right. I mean, just feels like people are like, oh, it's just a tool. Well,
Yeah.
there's
It's
another
not.
there's
It's
another
not.
connotation for tool there.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. I
So,
think, and I think like if you use it, you're taking some wonderful piece of the experience of writing away from yourself. Because
Yes.
to me, it's like letting me live those emotions, letting me live in another story, like being able to look at something and go, oh my gosh, like I thought of that. I don't really know how a lot of the time, but my brain came up with that. Like, don't deny yourself that feeling. It's a really wonderful feeling.
well,
And it takes away the creativity.
Yeah.
yeah. Well, that's all of the questions. Thank you so much for everybody for all of your amazing, amazing questions.
Thank you so
Yes,
much,
thank
everybody,
you.
for coming and listening. And thank you, Jennifir, for all of your great questions. It was so great to
Yes.
talk to you.
Thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedule to sit and talk with us and talk
Of
about
course.
your wonderful books. And I can't wait for your next one.
Thank you.
And I hope you can enjoy your summer. And just thank you for everyone joining us. Thank you, Mina, for providing this opportunity to have this webinar so we can
Yes,
share it with so many people.
It's
it,
been
it,
a
it
pleasure.
takes a village, like I said earlier. So thank you
Yes.
to all of the libraries who helped make this possible. I really appreciate it.
Good night, everybody.
All right. Good night. Thank you.